Once you were old enough, what were the dark family secrets you were finally let in on? When I was about 10, my cousin and his dad died. I always thought it was an accident, and on the same day. When I was old enough, I was told that his dad actually committed suicide and my cousin followed him couple months later. Truly devastated me, although I didn't know them well. I am so sorry. I know of a similar story. When I was a senior in high school 2006, 2007, one of my classmates lost her dad to suicide over winter break. Poor girl was so close to him, and it took her a couple of months to feel mentally okay enough to come back to school. She had just gotten back into a regular school routine when one day, she was pulled out of class. Her older brother had committed suicide. That was it for her, and she finished her schoolwork at home for the rest of the year. Obviously it was beyond devastating for her, her older sister, and their mother. And it broke our hearts that while the rest of us were doing prom, prepping for graduation and college, etc., she was at home wrestling with deep grief. From what I can tell on Facebook, they are all doing well today. But man, I cannot imagine what it was like to be the people most directly affected by that situation. My uncle is believed to have murdered 2 Australian police officers in the late 80s. Holy poop. Wall Street. Yep. Peter McAvoy. I met Peter at an RSL club I worked at in Newcastle and had quite a few interactions with him. He was playing the pokies the first time I met him, and I saw his surname on his member's card when I went over for a payout and said I had friends that were McAvoys and maybe he was related, and he said he was estranged from his family because he was accused of doing something very bad that he did not do. I was like, oh, I'm okay. Then I googled him. That my favorite cousin was not missing. All I knew growing up, he was 13 years older than me, was that he would come and go out. He lived with us when I was a baby, and after he moved out he would visit every 6 months or so out of the blue. But we never visited him or called him. His visits were one of my favorite things in the world. I loved him like a brother. By the time I was a teenager, I did understand that he had issues with his parents. They had kicked him out at 13 and my parents took him in. But the kind of childhood messes with you. In between visits to my parents, he avoided the rest of the family, moved out, and did not hold jobs for long, which is why my parents did not always know where he was. But in my later teens he stopped coming over at all. I asked repeatedly if anyone had heard from him and I was told number. I asked about contacting him and was told no one had a number or address for him. He would come around when he felt like it, but it stretched on for years. I really worried he was dead, and I really missed him. In my later 20s I finally found out that everyone knew where he was the whole time. He was in prison for murder. From what I hear, it was actually somewhat justified. He was defending his new wife, who I never got to meet. I also found out some super shitty things about how the extended family sided with his ducked up parents and refused to help him or his wife when he got arrested, and that they shamed my dad into not helping either. I tried to send a message to him in prison, but I do not know if he ever got it. I wish he knew that I did not turn my back on him for decades like everyone else did. I just did not know. To put it shortly, my family tree is more like a very long branch. Yes, we have the genetic defects to prove it. That is not uncommon where I am from. Hundreds of tiny isolated rural communities with little easy access led to a lot of accidental inbreeding. World-class geneticists flock to my province to study all the weird poop that pops up. It has gotten to the point that people in other nations have found out their family was from here when they get a disorder or defect that was only present in this one family from this certain bay. That is really interesting. I would not ask for an example disorder, since that might reveal your location. But it is interesting there is such highly unique mutations in humans. Not so much let in on, as we found out by accident. But apparently my dad's first love and him got into a serious car crash when he was 25 and she died. He lived with her father for years after her death. He still occasionally comes to visit my dad, even 30 years later. We were always told he was a mentor until my sister pressed my mom on the subject. One of my sisters is even named after the girl that died, middle name, and we never even knew about her until last year. None of us have ever brought it up with him. My friend was engaged to his first love in their early 20s when she passed from cancer. 10 years later, He got married to an amazing woman who honored his late fiancée in their wedding ceremony. Not a dry eye in the place. My cousins used to stay with us a lot. I remember my male cousin was just a small baby when he first came to us. He would scream and scream and scream all night. And Mum put him in my room, so I used to spend the night cuddling him or playing peekaboo. My other cousin was my age 5 at the time. I found out later. My auntie was a heroin addict and a sex worker. My cousins were the result of clients, and my male cousin was actually born whilst my auntie was heavily using and he was going through withdrawal after his birth. My grandparents ended up flying in from Wales and taking custody of them, as well as putting my auntie on a plane and leaving with all of them. It was one of the saddest days of my life that I never understood. I thought they were going to be my brother and sister and wasn't sure why all of a sudden they were taken from me. Edit. Wow. Thank you so much for the awards. I've just woken up and have loads to read through. For those asking, my auntie made it out of that life. She prefers to be alone and doesn't have anything really to do with the family. She still lives in the same village as my grandparents. Them being taken was always something that upset me so much, but was swept under the rug so much I thought I was being dramatic. Seeing all your comments is so validating, and I thank you for that. So sad to read this. How are they doing now? My male cousin is doing super well. We are still very close. He came to my wedding last year in Australia. My female cousin unfortunately has succumbed to a similar lifestyle as my auntie and has disconnected herself from the family. I think she went through some pretty heinous stuff when she was being bounced around through foster homes before us, so she has got a lot of darkness. My uncle was raped as a young boy, and my grandparents not only did not believe him, but beat him and disowned him for bringing such lies into our house. Sad thing is, I was raped as a kid, and while dealing with it my dad told me what happened to my uncle. I assume so I did not feel so alone. My uncle is still the only one I know personally who has experienced the same trauma as me. And I am not meant to know, so cannot talk to him about it. There's some bad advice here. Do not talk to people who've been abused just because it is a similar abuse, unless they are open and healthy about it. Not only is it dangerous, as they may get upset or have their own issues, you can come out worse if they are embittered or were not able to resolve it mentally. Always seek professional health advice first. As I doubt I have to tell you, there are complex issues in all child molestation cases, and everyone deals with it differently. People sharing past abuses in a spontaneous way is fine, but I would never seek out someone because a relative mentioned it, unless, as I said earlier, they were open and healthy about it. Your dad was likely hoping to make you feel better, but I know for me it would be misguided. Finding out others, especially in the family, with similar experiences of sexual abuse is more upsetting than comforting, in my opinion. My dad's family were poor immigrants and a very large family. There was all sorts of physical and sexual abuse, unfortunately. Hearing some of their stories from the war was horrific. Didn't make me feel good, and in some ways normalized it. That said, I have had some deep, meaningful and helpful conversations with friends, but they were in a healthy place. That my cousin was actually my half-brother. Mom got pregnant in college and my aunt and uncle adopted him. And that my dad was not my biological father. Mom and dad got divorced. She got pregnant by another man. And my dad was not able to have kids of his own, so they got remarried and he raised me as his own. There are 2 posts here about a cousin that is also a half-brother. And if you put the 2 together, what do you get? A full brother. The reason I had a live-in babysitter when I was 5 that moved in at 2 a.m. was because my mom's cousin killed 2 kids and we ended up harboring his daughter during the trial. He is the only person on death row in my county. What happened to her after? My brother swears she stole my mom's jewelry and ran off. Run off? Mom says she did not, but I'm pretty sure she is in town with kids of her own. Your mom's cousin was not bona fide. That is for sure. When I was young I thought it was really nice that my nana lived with my aunt and her family since she was getting on a bit and it meant she was looked after and there were always people around. Aunt has 6 kids. Occasionally aunt would gripe about being the one looking after nana since aunt is also one of many kids, and being young I sympathized, but given they all spent loads of time with nana too, did not think it was a big deal. You do not think about financial responsibility when you are young, I think. Just social and caring. Well, it turns out the reason Nana lives with Aunt is because Aunt and her husband convinced Nana to put the house in their name so they could look after her affairs, and sold it out from under her and invested the money in a pyramid scheme, so it is gone now. Because of this, her siblings refuse to give Aunt a penny towards looking after Nana, since it is her fault Nana has no money or assets, and instead pay to take Nana out all the time. Meals, shopping, activities, so she does not go without, but they let Aunt struggle under the weight of Nana's general living expenses. Aunt's kids are all independent now, so they're not going to be impacted by money problems. Now I look back at her griping with annoyance and think what a terrible person she is. That my grandpa molested all the women in our family, not just me. And they let it happen because that's just what you do. When my grandfather molested me young adult at the time, my grandmother literally got down on her knees and begged me not to tell because it would bring shame to the family. Sorry, Gram. He brought shame to the family with his actions. It is not my duty to protect him or your reputation. That is terrible. What happened afterwards? Did you say something? My grandfather, who was my mother's stepfather, molested my mother when she was 6, and he repeatedly raped her older sister. My grandmother knew about it and kicked him out only for a short while. Then she took him back in and kicked out her 14-year-old daughter, my mom's older sister, and sent her to live with her stepmother and biological father, knowingly full well her stepmother beat the crap out of her on a regular basis. My mother told me when I was an adult and complaining about how my grandma was sexist because she never let me go fishing with my grandpa and always let my brother go. Turns out my grandma knew he had a thing for little girls and at least tried to make sure my sister and I were never alone with him. Thankfully, neither my sister nor I were molested by him, even though my mother tried repeatedly to get me alone with him. I also realized in my 30s, after a decade of therapy and different meds, that my mother was severely abusive towards me via emotional incest. She found out I was being sexually abused by my older brother and made it a point to leave me alone with him as often as possible and make me ask him and be alone with him to use family items like the computer or PlayStation. She would wait until he was done and then make me go give her a back rub while she was naked and sleep in her bed with her. She and my aunt both swear they're not messed up and still hang out with my grandma and grandpedo. I do not really talk with that side of the family anymore. What the duck? It actually took me a really long time to realize that she also sexually abused me. She never actually molested me, so I never considered it sexual abuse until I did. My grandma retired and she still decided to work for her brother in his restaurant to save up money for when she dies. Funerals are, obviously, expensive. She insisted he would hold on to her paychecks and pay for her funeral when she dies. He never did. I think this is the shittiest one. To actually exploit your elderly sister that way. I do not know why, but this is the worst, but it is horrible to me. My step-grandfather has always been an alcoholic. As a child, he even taught me how to mix his favorite drink. As kid at like 6 years old, I would mix his drink as he liked and bring it into him in the living room. Dante asked what the drink was a mix of, cause I literally can't remember, and my grandpa always acted funny. I always liked spending time with him cause I found him funny. So I never saw the bad side of his alcoholism, and he never made me drink or anything, so overall he didn't have any negative impact on me at all. But before I was born he could get so drunk he threatened to kill my grandma, and when he got in a car accident and came home he was bleeding badly from his head and he started saying my granny shot him. He even threw out some of the wedding pictures my parents had. I never knew how horrible he was. Maybe cause he liked kids or something. He would make me cocoa and watch Garfield with me when I was a kid. He was never a bad influence in my life. So it was so weird to me when I found out these things about him. Before he died though, he really regretted drinking. And he completely stopped. He became really depressed too until his granddaughter biological was born. He was so happy about his granddaughter. He died regretting everything, and a sober man who was happy to have been able to meet his one and only biological granddaughter. Regardless of everything, he really changed in the end, and everyone was really upset he died. Most my mom's family were raging drunks. She was a very late oopsie baby, so almost all her siblings were grown once she came around, and she spent a lot of time bouncing between siblings, parents, or other relatives. Her older brothers got her drunk at age 5. and laughed while she puked all over herself. She learned to drive around 10 because her brother would get too shit-faced and she'd have to drive him home. And there was also pretty severe medical neglect. She has never gotten therapy and was a real tree to be raised by. Intergenerational trauma, the gift that keeps on giving.